Hi, today we're going to be discussing a very important topic that I think is found within the subject of geography. We're going to be discussing the physical features that are found within South Africa. I did notice in the CAPS document that in the year before this year, obviously, which is grade 4, that you guys did cover content that is very similar or related to this topic. So you should have somewhat background experience and knowledge on this topic. But before we dive in, just a very important question I just want to ask is, are you guys familiar with the physical features that are actually found within South Africa? Good. We have different physical features that are found within South Africa. Just to name a few, we have rivers, we have mountains, we definitely have the ocean, we also have different sets of hills. And these work hand in hand with the landscape, with the climate, in order to ensure that we have the beautiful country that we have. So why is this important? Well, I'll tell you. The different features that we find within the entire landscape in South Africa is important because each and every landscape or each and every feature has a different role. So let's dive into it. The feature that we're first going to look into is the features of mountains. What is a mountain? A mountain is a piece of land that rises above surrounding landscape due to the movement of the earth. Now, according to the presentation that I did that is attached to this, we did see that we discussed this in detail, and we will go through the slides as part of the knowledge and the content so that you guys have a very familiar understanding with the different features that we're going to look into before attempting the questionnaire that will follow. So, as mentioned, a mountain is a piece of land that rises above the surrounding landscape. This simply means that mountains are formed when the earth moves, then the different tectonic plates shift against each other, and this causes an upliftment or the lifting up of the different land. Mountains have steep, sloping sides with sharp or round edges. This depends on the exact landscape, it depends on the environment, and it also depends on the rainfall that is found within the area. That will determine exactly how steep, how sharp, and how round the edges on the mountain will be. They have a high point called a peak. However, this does vary in the case of certain mountains where they don't have a peak, they have a plateau. But we'll dive into that in a second. Mountains are high above sea level. What the sea level simply is that's the point where the ocean meets the land. So mountains are located high within the sky. That means that they're located high above sea level. There's also different types of mountains as mentioned, but as I said, we will look into that in a second. The famous mountains that we find in South Africa, just to highlight the most important two that I think we have in South Africa, is the Drakensberg mountain. And this is one of the most exceptional and beautiful mountains that we find. And by its name, it's located in Drakensberg. We also have the very famous and familiar Table Mountain. This mountain is found in the famous and extravagant city of Cape Town. And it got its name from its look because the top of the mountain is a plateau. What that means is that it doesn't have a sharp point known as a peak on the top. Instead, it has a flat surface that looks like a table. It's very famous and very familiar because of the activities that happens there, like hiking and stuff. Next, we look into another feature called mountain ranges. Mountain ranges simply is the location of specific mountains next to each other, meaning mountains are located in a line next to each other. They are known or they are called mountain ranges. And one example of this, as seen in the PowerPoint presentation that we'll go through, is called Cederberg. Cederberg is a very famous and very important mountain range that we find in South Africa. It's also famous for its hiking and climbing. Next, we will look at another feature called a river. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the river, but just to go into detail, a river is a large body of water that flows downhill due to gravity. Exactly that, when it rains, the amount of water accumulates in a certain area, and due to gravity, obviously, it has to move in a certain area. Gravity moves downwards, as we know, so the water will flow according to that. It is a vital source of life for humans and animals. This is simply because we as humans and animals as animals are very dependent on a water source, and rivers provide that, and we as humans collect that in a dam, and that becomes our drinking water. Rivers can be wide and deep, or they can be shallow and narrow. What this simply means is that some rivers are wide and deep, and some rivers are very shallow and not that deep. And the reason for this is because certain areas experience high rainfall and other areas do not. One very famous example of a river is the Orange River. It is one of the largest rivers that is found within South Africa, and it is very well known. Next, we'll look at the features of valleys and hills. A valley is an area of land that lies between hills, and it almost always has a stream flowing through it. The difference between a valley and a river is simply that a stream or a valley is a very narrow, very shallow flow of water, where a river is usually very wide and very deep. Those are the main differences. And a valley also goes through hills, while rivers normally aren't surrounded or go through hills. A stream, as mentioned, is a small body of water that flows downhill due to gravity. And a hill is very similar to a mountain, but they differ in that the hills are not as steep as what you would find in mountains. More often than not, mountains are very steep, whereas hills aren't. And one very famous example of this is the Valley of 1,000 Hills. Next, we will look at what a waterfall is. This is also another very important feature for South Africa, as it also serves as a historical site and heritage site. A waterfall is a large stream of water falling from a specific height. It forms when the river flows over a very steep incline. And to put it in simple English, this means that water flows in a river, and then it comes to a point where it's a very steep slope and the water falls downwards. One very famous example of this is the Makmak Falls. It's the most popular waterfall in South Africa. Last but not least, we will look at coastlines, also known as seashores or beaches. These are very, very famous places for South Africa, especially during the summer, because this is where people tend to go whenever they need to cool down. And one very famous example of a beach is Camps Bay, located in Cape Town. Thank you.